He betrayed everything I trusted. He betrayed her 23 times. That's what Clint Eastwood claims. The numbers themselves are almost incomprehensible, but the weight behind them isn't. It's a kind of quiet horror that creeps in slowly, the kind you feel in your chest before your mind can fully process it. You hear it, and the mind wants to reject it. It wants to say, no, this can't be true. But the pieces, as they've started to emerge, point towards something darker, more complicated, and more devastating than most could have imagined. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It didn't start with murder. It didn't start with headlines or police reports. No, it started long before the cameras, the flashing lights, and the red carpets. It started in private homes, in quiet rooms, with the unspoken dynamics of trust, family, and power. And now, in the aftermath of tragedy, those private moments are finally spilling into public view. Rob Reiner and his wife, Michelle, were found dead in their Beverly Hills home one cold night. Stabbed. Fatal wounds. Their son, Nick Reiner, arrested that same evening, charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The world saw the shock, the fear, the news flashes, the names. But what the world didn't immediately see, and what Clint Eastwood has now revealed, is the context behind the storm. The betrayal that had been quietly festering behind closed doors. The secret that, once exposed, makes the tragedy almost incomprehensible in scale. So why speak out now, Clint? Why wait months, when the murders themselves were already dominating headlines? It's a question that hangs in the air, heavy, unanswerable in simple terms. But when you understand what he's claiming, that someone he knew, someone he trusted, allegedly violated his family in the most personal and repeated ways, there's a clarity to the silence. Sometimes, restraint isn't weakness. Sometimes, it's an almost unbearable way of carrying the truth. What exactly is he accusing Rob Reiner of? 23 encounters with his daughter, repeated over time. That number alone is staggering. But the truth isn't just in the number. It's in the layers of power, of influence, of unchecked behavior, and the way someone so celebrated publicly could, allegedly, behave privately. Hollywood has always had its legends, its icons, and its untouchables. But rarely do those untouchables cross lines that shake families to their core, leaving scars that no public apology could ever reach. And yet, here we are. Clint Eastwood, a man often admired for his stoic control, his public fortitude, now forced to confront a private storm that he says could not be ignored. He says it, not with screaming anger, not with spectacle, but with a quiet, deliberate intensity. You can almost feel the weight of each word as it hangs, unsaid, between sentences. The murders of Rob and Michelle Reiner provide a chilling frame for what comes next. Yes, the world will focus on Nick Reiner's arrest, on the legal proceedings, on the horrific moment when life itself was taken in a private home. But for Clint Eastwood, the legal facts are only part of the story. There's another dimension here, one that is far more insidious because it happened over time, in secrecy, behind smiles, behind industry accolades, behind the veneer of normalcy. Imagine for a moment being a parent. You trust someone implicitly. Someone your family interacts with, someone whose name is respected in the public sphere. And then, without warning, you learn that this person, allegedly, took advantage of that trust in ways that are almost impossible to quantify. How would you respond? Anger? Shock? Silence? Clint chose silence, for months, while the world focused on the sensational news of a murder case. And yet that silence is now itself a part of the story, because speaking, finally, changes everything. The emotional stakes here are enormous. For Clint Eastwood, for his daughter, for the legacy of those involved, and for anyone trying to understand what happened that night in Beverly Hills. And make no mistake, the stakes are not just emotional, they're moral. There's a reckoning here that stretches beyond legal definitions of right and wrong. It's about trust, about power, about the betrayal of the most basic human bonds. You might ask, why bring this up now? Why dwell on something so personal? The answer is that the public needs to understand the full context, the full magnitude of what was happening behind closed doors. Headlines capture murder. They capture shock. But they rarely capture the slow erosion of trust, the quiet cruelty, the hidden betrayals that set the stage for tragedy. Clint's revelation forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. How do we protect those we love when power, fame, and influence are in the hands of someone who may not respect boundaries? How do families navigate secrets that have the potential to destroy them? And most importantly, how does truth finally emerge when so many forces, conscious or not, conspire to keep it hidden? The story unfolds like a slow, almost cruel burn. You sense the tension from the very first moment. You want to turn away, but you can't, not really. Because there's a human instinct to know, to witness, to understand. And as the pieces begin to come together, Eastwood's statements, the timing of the alleged encounters, the murders themselves, you realize the complexity and horror of it all. There is irony here, too. Hollywood celebrates legends, applauds icons, elevates those who walk among us as untouchable. And yet sometimes, the most revered figures can cast the darkest shadows. Clint Eastwood's words, restrained yet piercing, cut through that glossy veneer. They force us to see the contradiction. How can someone so publicly lauded allegedly commit acts so privately destructive? And still, the full truth remains elusive. Clint speaks, but not every detail is revealed immediately. There is intentional restraint. Some moments are implied, hinted at, or carefully measured, giving the audience space to feel the enormity without overwhelming them with the explicit. There is tension in restraint, power in what is not said, and anticipation for what will eventually emerge. So the question lingers, what comes next? The murders themselves are shocking. The alleged betrayal is shocking. But the two together? They create a story that is both almost unimaginable and entirely real. And as you listen, as you process, you realize that the narrative is only just beginning. The events, the emotions, the implications, they will ripple outward, affecting everyone connected, and perhaps even those who feel only tangentially involved. And yet, even with the weight of those words, even with the unimaginable nature of the alleged betrayal, there's another layer that can't be ignored, the timing. Clint Eastwood didn't speak out immediately. He didn't drop a press release in the heat of headlines about the Reiner murders. He waited. And that waiting, it matters. It tells you something about the man, about the story, about the stakes. Sometimes silence isn't cowardice. Sometimes it's a form of strategy. Sometimes it's the unbearable act of carrying a truth that could shatter lives even further if revealed too soon. What makes this story so gripping and so painful is how it forces us to consider the intersection of two tragedies: the personal, private betrayal that Clint Eastwood alleges, and the public, violent tragedy of Rob and Michelle Reiner's deaths. You can't separate one from the other entirely. The family dynamics, the patterns of behavior, the hidden tensions, they all converge. And that convergence, that overlap, is what turns a shocking headline into a story that lingers in your mind, long after the video ends, long after the news cycle moves on. It's also worth considering the environment in which all this unfolded. Hollywood is a strange ecosystem, one where power is concentrated, reputations are curated, and boundaries are often fluid. It's a world where charisma can mask manipulation, where influence can shield misconduct, and where the people who might otherwise intervene either don't see, don't believe, or choose not to act. And in that ecosystem, Clint Eastwood's daughter, just one person, found herself navigating an environment stacked against her, with the weight of fame, expectation, and secrecy pressing in from all sides. You might be asking yourself, right now, how does someone endure that? How does a parent react to allegations of betrayal on such a scale? And what about the child? How do they carry it forward? There's no easy answer. Eastwood's approach has been one of measured disclosure, of restraint, of allowing the truth to emerge in a controlled way. His revelation is deliberate, calculated in its timing, and yet raw in its emotional impact. That combination of control and rawness is what gives the story its unsettling power. The numbers themselves, 23 alleged encounters, are almost secondary to the emotional context. The repetition, the persistence, the alleged deliberate nature of the acts, that's what makes them devastating. There's a cumulative effect that you can't overlook. Each instance, by itself, might have been digestible, survivable, even. But taken together, as Eastwood claims, they form a pattern, a repeated violation of trust, a slow erosion of safety and security that no family should ever experience. And here's another point that complicates the narrative further: public perception versus private reality. Rob Reiner, celebrated actor and director, known for his charm, wit, and professionalism, projected an image of success, affability, and approachability. But Eastwood's allegations suggest a private reality that couldn't be more different. This is the kind of contradiction that pulls people in. The shock of seeing two worlds collide, the dissonance between who someone appears to be and who they allegedly were behind closed doors. It's a tension that grabs the audience and doesn't let go, the kind that makes you lean forward even as your heart recoils. And yet, even as we confront these allegations, there is a sense of uncertainty. Eastwood speaks, but the details are measured. He doesn't spill every interaction at once. He teases, he hints, he layers the story. That approach is what makes this a slow-burn exposé rather than a tabloid scream. The audience is drawn into the rhythm of revelation, feeling the suspense in the pauses, the impact in the omissions. Every detail released carries weight because it is deliberate, intentional, and emotionally charged. The murders themselves, as horrifying as they are, also provide a grim backdrop for understanding the scale of the alleged betrayal. They force us to consider family dynamics, the ripple effects of secrecy, and the ways in which hidden truths can fester until they explode into tragedy. You start to see the contours of a story that is as much about human behavior as it is about headline events. A story about betrayal, about consequence, and about the messy, painful reality that unfolds when private horrors intersect with public lives. And there is a human element that can't be overstated. This isn't just a story of Hollywood figures or celebrity intrigue. At its core, it's about people. The parent who feels the sting of betrayal, the child who carries a hidden burden, the family whose lives are forever changed, and even the wider circle of friends and colleagues who must reconcile what they thought they knew with the revelations that emerge. That human dimension is what gives the story its weight, its texture, and its lingering impact. Think about the emotions involved. Anger, shock, grief, disbelief, horror. But also, perhaps, a subtle, quiet mourning for innocence lost, for trust violated, for family bonds strained under pressure. That mix of emotions is what makes this story resonate beyond the headlines. It's not simply scandal. It's tragedy compounded by secrecy, by timing, and by the cruel irony that those who are supposed to be protected are the very ones at risk. And while the public will focus, inevitably, on the murders, it is the layers beneath. The alleged betrayal, the secrecy, the repeated violation of trust, that give this story its enduring tension. Because once the narrative of Rob and Michelle Reiner's deaths is joined with Clint Eastwood's revelations, you start to understand that the headlines capture only a fragment of the truth. The full scope is far more intricate, far more unsettling, and far more emotionally complex. The question, then, becomes, how did we get here? How did these threads intertwine, and what might have been preventable? What patterns existed that went unnoticed? Were there warning signs? And if so, why were they ignored? It's in those questions, these unanswerable, unsettling questions, that the audience is drawn in, compelled to follow the story deeper, to witness the slow unfolding of events that led to unimaginable outcomes. And so, we stand at the edge of this narrative. The murders have shocked the world. The allegations of betrayal have shaken the very foundations of trust within one family. And Clint Eastwood's revelation forces us to look closer, to consider not only what happened, but how and why it could happen. Every new detail, every hint, every layer that unfolds brings the audience closer to understanding the enormity of the story. And yet, even now, there remains more to uncover. It was a quiet evening in Beverly Hills. The kind of night where the air feels almost too still, like the world is holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. But nobody in the neighborhood suspected that the silence would be broken by violence, by a tragedy that would rattle Hollywood and the wider public to its core. Rob Reiner and his wife, Michelle, had lived there for years. Their home, immaculate, curated, private, a sanctuary, as any family home should be. Yet on that night, The very walls that promised safety would become witnesses to something unthinkable. Nick Reiner, their son, had been arrested. 2 counts of first-degree murder. It's a phrase that lands with a weight that's hard to describe. Not just because of what it signifies legally, but because of what it implies emotionally. The idea that a child could take the lives of both parents in the same night is beyond comprehension. It's a horror story most people cannot imagine. And yet, it happened. The headlines flashed instantly, each one repeating the names, the charges, the details that could fit into a sentence, a soundbite, a tweet. But the soundbites never convey the fear. They never convey the stillness of the home before the emergency calls, the sirens, the flashing police lights that broke the calm of a Los Angeles night. The first reports were fragmented, like pieces of a puzzle with jagged edges. Neighbors heard a scream, or maybe a series of screams. Others reported nothing unusual until they noticed police cars swarming. Reporters scrambled to understand the timeline. How long had the murders occurred before anyone found out? Was it a premeditated act? Was it a sudden explosion of violence? These were the questions everyone asked, but the answers weren't simple. They never are in cases like this. Inside the Reiner home, investigators later described a scene that was chaotic yet contained, violent yet eerily deliberate. There were signs of struggle. There were wounds that indicated rage, but also control. Some details, the authorities said, would remain private, withheld for the sake of ongoing investigation. But the essence was clear. 2 lives ended, 2 people who had built a family and a home, extinguished in one night. The shockwaves were immediate. Hollywood, a world used to gossip and rumors, suddenly had a tragedy that felt uncomfortably real.